Hello, thank you for visiting my channel and watching this how to play video of Evil Dead 2, the board game. This is my way to thank the company Jasco Games for saving the old Kickstarter, because I was able to receive my copy, being an old backer, with just paying for shipping. So again, I want to help the company increase their sales, because they didn't make that much money on the Kickstarter. If you haven't, please subscribe, and if we get to 1,000 subscribers, I will teach Julie how to play Squad Leader, which is kind of an inside joke because Advanced Squad Leader is one of the most complicated games, but we'll start with basic Squad Leader. And also down below, you'll see in the description a quick little survey. Please complete it so that you can give me an idea of what content you would like this channel to provide. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to focus on teaching the rules in order of the rulebook, because it is sequential. And so if you want to follow along with the rulebook and pause at times, please consider doing that. All right, so the first thing, it starts out with an index and an introduction. So it does the object of the game, which I'll show you real quick here on the map board, is that we're going to be collecting pages of the Necronomicon, which will be hidden in different spaces, which I haven't set up yet. And depending on the number of players, you have to close the portal, which is here. So if you're doing a 3-player game, you have to get 6 of 11 pages that will be hidden on the board. If you turn into a Deadite player, you have to get 6 of the 11 pages to summon the demon. There's also different ways to win and lose, which I'll get to in a moment. All right, so here's the introduction, just flavor text. Go to the next side, it goes over the components, which I'll show you here in a moment. And so let's take a look at some of those components. So on the big camera here, we have all the Deadite minions. Unlike the movie, you got to have a lot of opponents to face. So there's going to be more Deadites than there are in the movie. I'm not too sure what you do with Hero Ash here. I think it's just a bonus fig that comes at the very end of the movie, but it's not represented in the game. You have Ash's Evil Hand, which is a boss. Henrietta, another boss. The Evil Tree. And Applehead with 2 hands. And so you have boss cards here, if you want to see what they look like on the other side. Again, here's Applehead, which is in red, and the other 3. So these are boss Deadites, and these are minion Deadites, which will have some effect on how they move. For instance, just to go over it real quick, minion Deadites can go through windows, but boss Deadites cannot. Here are the wound trackers. These are spike traps that when you move on them, do 1 damage to which will kill a Deadite minion. You have barricades, which you can put over windows and doors to keep out bosses and Deadite minions. Here you have the corruption deck. Now this is what the side looks like here, and I'll go over how to set that up in a moment. So you have humans in the deck and Deadites in the deck. Here's the event deck, which is what it looks like on this side, where there's 1 special card you have to stack in a certain way and the other ones. Here you have the player boards with short rule explanations for the objects you can get, and if you get so many Necronomicon pages, you can cast spells. Over here you can choose among 6 characters. So this is a 3 to 6 player game, and you'll see that there's a hero figure. So here's Ash as a hero, and then if he turns into a Deadite, this is what he looks like here. So every character has a hero and a Deadite version. Here's a 1st player marker, 3 cursed dice with neutrals that are black, successes as chainsaws, and then failures as Deadite faces. And then here you have tokens, which will be distributed upside down to discover. All right, so those are all the pieces, which is on this page right here. All right, so let's go to the next page. Again, it's just a continuation of what the game board is. Again, I already went over the player boards and the cursed dice. Character cards. Now, I'll explain what the stats are right now. So here is wounds. So Ash can take 5 wounds before he is defeated, and then he will reappear somewhere in the cabin on his next turn. And then 3 attack, so he'll roll 3 cursed dice. 2 speed, so every time he takes a movement action, he can move 2 adjacent spaces. And adjacent spaces are anything that's not blocked by a wall, like right here it's blocked by a wall. You can't go from here to here. So basically you can go anywhere you need to as long as it's not blocked by a wall. And then virtue. Now virtue is important because if you get a corruption card that says Deadite, you will become a Deadite and your victory conditions will change by the end of the game. So like I mentioned before, human players want to close the gate, Deadite players want to summon the demon. So you see that different characters have different stats. So you could decide amongst each other who gets to play what character. So back to the rule book. So again, I already went over the faces and the different corruption cards. On the next side, goes over event cards, boss cards, item tokens. Now, why did I put a little note here? Because in the FAQ, it's not mentioned in the rules, but this is supposed to pass from player to player, from turn to turn. So on the first turn, if I'm Ash, I'll go first. If Julie's playing Annie, and going in clockwise order, she would be the next start player on the following turn. Now that's important to remember this rule, because if you become a Deadite player, it's an advantage to go first. So that's why it's important that turn order is switched up clockwise. So that's not in the rules, but it's in the FAQ. All right, so here's the other things I already went over. Now we're starting to get into setup. Okay, so the first thing to do is you look at this, is how many Necronomicon pages do you have to mix in with the tokens. You're going to play with all the tokens. It just depends on the number of players, how many Necronomicon pages there are. So I'm going to do a setup for 3 players, and so you shouldn't have any tokens left after you place them if you do this correctly. So here you are as the board. I've already taken out the Necronomicon pages that are not going to be used. And so you look on the board. Let me move this out of the way. And you look for any spaces that say 4, 5, or 6, since I'm setting up for a 3-player, and you will not place tokens there. So I'm not going to set up the whole board, but for instance, I'd put 2 here because there's a ×2, ×2. And you go around, again, avoiding any spot that doesn't fit your number of players. So I would do that on the whole board, filling it in. Again, if you do it correctly, you will not have any of these tokens left if you place them correctly. So I'm just going to put this right here. Okay, so let's go to the next step. All right, so I've already placed the item tokens around the board. And then you form the supplies, you choose your characters. And it doesn't really say, okay, so where do you place them? You place them anywhere inside the cabin, but not on the porch. Now, why is that important? Because this whole section right here is part of the gate in the porch. And then you have these porches here. If you ever have a hard time seeing where the spaces are, depending on the light in the room, you'll see right here, for instance, this map shows you where the spaces are. So you cannot place a starting character in any of these first 3 spaces. You have to place a starting character in here. So if you're playing with a 3-player game and Ash, Annie, and Bobby Joe were playing, we could all start in the same room. That's something that's mentioned in the FAQ if we really wanted to. But if we wanted to spread out in order to find pages, because again, we need to find the pages to close the portal. So you could start out like that if we wanted to. Okay, moving on. Now we got to set up the event deck. So you'll see that there are 13 event cards. You'll do 8 on top, 4 on the bottom, and after the bottom 4, you'll place the "We're Gonna Die." Now, why is this card important? Because that's when Applehead appears, and that's when it gets really, if that happens, you might not be able to win the game depending on how far along you are in the game, because you cannot close the portal when Applehead is in this space. So just to make sure I don't forget this, when Applehead appears here, okay, that means the space is blocked. You have to do 1 damage to basically knock him out for that turn, and then you could cast a spell. But as long as he's active in this space, you cannot cast the closed gate spell. In other words, you cannot place pages up here. So when he appears, it makes it that much more difficult to win the game. So let's set up the deck. I've separated, we're going to die a card. I would shuffle up the other 12. I take 4, put on the bottom, put we're going to die on top, and so now these 8 will go on top. So the event deck is ready. So that will go right here. All right, so next thing you look at is the Create the Corruption deck. Now this is based on the number of players. So for a 3-player game, you're going to use 12 cards. 11 will be human cards and 1 will be a Deadite card. So let's set that up. So I have 1 Deadite card. So that means one of the 3 players in this 3-player game has a potential to become a Deadite. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So these go off to the side, unused. So you can get more Deadite human players in a 4, 5, or 6-player game. So each player will get dealt one of these cards. Now they don't get to look at, this is important, when you get your first corruption card at the beginning of the game, you don't get to look at it. I'll tell you in a moment when you do. So Ash would get 1, and then Annie and Bobby Joe, since those are the 3 that we're playing with. Now, obviously these would be spread out and you get your own player board, but just for the sake here, they're right here to show you how it is. And these other characters would go away. They wouldn't be obviously still out with a 3-player game. All right, so now starting corruption. Now here's an important rule here. It's mentioned in a couple of places, but it's not mentioned on the back of the rule book. You're not allowed to look at your first corruption card until you get a second one, or you pick up a Necronomicon page. So that's what's not on the back of the rule book. It doesn't mention that you get to look at it when you pick up a Necronomicon page. So this is mentioned here and another place in the rule book. And then you figure out the start player. The last player who read or pretended to read a Latin phrase is the start player. All right, so that's set up. And then it has a nice little map here on how to do it. So let's take a look again at the other ways that you can win or lose. So again, like I said, everybody starts out human, and then you're going to win when you close the gate. However, all players will lose if the event phase deck runs out. That includes any Deadite player. So the clock is ticking, so to speak, even for the Deadite player. Now, the Deadite player can win if there's no more corruption cards remaining and there needs to be 1 drawn. So, looking right here, remember there are, with 3 players now, there are 9 of these cards. As soon as all 9 is the other 9 are distributed and a 10th one needs to be drawn, the Deadite player will win. Okay, so let's look at the sequence. First, you're going to draw an event phase card. Then the players will go, and then the Deadite. That means the Deadite minions and bosses. If a player becomes a Deadite, that Deadite player will go during the player phase, not during the Deadite's turns. So it's something to keep in mind. Okay, so the event phase, you'll see that there'll be a little chart here based on the number of players. So if we were playing the game right now, we draw the first event, okay? And I'll show it on this camera. Actually, let's show it on the other camera where it's a lot bigger. Okay, so we're going to spawn 1 Deadite at A and C. And then each Deadite, and then, so you do that first. So A and C. Again, remember, I don't have all the tokens on the board to save time on setup. So that's where they first appear. Now you read the event portion. Each Deadite minion not in the same area as a character moves 1 area toward the nearest character. Now there's some rules for movement on who they will move towards, I should say. But for now, I'm just going to show you. We'll get to that rule in a moment. All right, so Bobby Joe's the closest one, so they're going to start moving towards that way. I could count them, and it might be equal. If it's equal, then the start player gets to, well, we'll get to that in a moment in the rule book. All right. So that's how you reveal a event card. So here's the rules, though, for that. If you can't spawn any more Deadite minions because you ran out, well, then you just don't spawn them. There might be a continuous effect, so you basically put it on top of the deck to remind yourself to check that. So now, once we've revealed the event phase, I'm going to go to the player phase. Now, this is an important chart here. Based on the number of players, you'll get that many actions. So we're only playing a 3-player game, we will have 3 actions. If we're playing a 5 or 6-player game, each player would have 2 actions. And so now let's go over the actions. The move action. Players can use all 3 actions if they want to move 3 times and move their speed. So as you remember here, I mentioned that, I'll move these cards for now. Remember who they are. Ash does not move as fast, neither does Bobby Joe. They move speed 2, but Annie will move 3, so she can move really fast. So let's take a look at some of the, I already mentioned what adjacent areas are. But if you move through a window, you'll lose all your remaining speed, and players cannot move through barriers. Let's just take a look at the other side. If you're moving away from enemies, so if you start your space in a area with more enemies and allies, you can only move out of that space and you lose the rest of your speed. Basically, you have a speed of 1 into the adjacent area. But you can cast a speed boost with Necronomicon. So let me just give you a quick little example of that. So let's say Annie's here. She's going to use her first action to move through the window. She moves through it. Even though she has 3 speed, she loses all of her speed to move through the window, any remaining speed. So she could have been back here and go 1, 2, then her third speed movement she loses. If she had started with 2 minions in her space, she could move out, but only a speed of 1, and she could even move through the window if she wanted to. If Ash was here with her, she could move out at full speed, 1, 2, 3, but if she moved through the window, of course, she would only be able to move 1. So she would go 1, 2, 3, let's say, and she doesn't even have to use all of her speed. Now Ash, when it gets to his turn, he would be the one that could only move out with 1. But he could destroy them first, defeat them first, and then move out. So again, she can move 1, 2, 3, and then move again if she wanted to. So that's something to keep in mind, that if there are more enemies in your space than allies, and that includes Deadite players and Deadite bosses as enemies, it could slow down your movement. All right, so moving on. So I already mentioned moving through windows. We'll use the remaining of your speed. Okay, and then we go over here onto attacking. Now, why did I put this little reminder here? Well, because when we did the 2 playthroughs, we forgot about this rule. If you are attacking Deadite minions, remove a number of minions equal to the number of successes. So let's say there are 2 Deadites here with Ash in this area. If you look at Ash's card, he will roll 3 dice. So let's say he rolled 2 chainsaws and a blank. He can destroy both of these Deadites because he got 2 successes. Now it is important, again, this is mentioned in the fact as well, to declare what you're attacking. Let's say Henrietta is here. Okay. If he declares the Deadite minion that he's attacking, he applies the 1 to that, and then he has to decide to apply the 1 to this one or Henrietta. Well, Henrietta takes too many successes to kill, so he'll do this one. But you may be wondering, well, what's the big deal? That's easy to remember. Well, let's say Annie's a Deadite player. Well, rollover successes do not get applied to Deadite players. You either attack a Deadite player, or Deadite minions and bosses. And this rollover successes would apply to only to that group. So if I do select a Deadite minion and do 1 damage to the Deadite minion, I can't then apply the 1 damage to Deadite Annie. If I selected Annie to attack and did 2 successes, she would take 2 wounds. Let's say she only had 1 wound left and I defeated her, and she would come back later. I cannot then apply this 1 success to someone else. Okay, so again, they're kind of treated like separate groups. So something to keep in mind that we didn't quite remember when we were playing ourselves. All right, so back to the rulebook. All right, so if you're attacking, okay, I already ran over that. That's why I made a little note there. And so there are things that can happen, though, when you're attacking that can go wrong for you. So there's a little chart on the back of the index. If you ever need to look at it, it's right here. So it can be dangerous to attack Deadites. You don't want to roll failures on the curse dice. Okay? You don't need to worry about neutrals. Neutrals only come into play when you're doing when Deadites are attacking you. So an important thing to remember when you are attacking is comparing the amount of successes to failures. So failures is good, causes damage, causes wounds. So obviously that's the best result if you're Ash. Still, this is a great result if you get a blank or a failure. It's when you start equaling results. So 1 failure and 1 success. So when that happens, you have to make a Virtue 1 check. So for Ash, that can be dangerous because he only has 1 die. He only rolls 1 die for a Virtue check, whereas other characters have more Virtue dice. Now when you have more failures than successes, like this example, you've got to make a Virtue 1 check and you take 1 wound. So it can be dangerous to attack Deadites. You can take wounds when you have more failures than successes, or you can make a Virtue check when you equal the number of failures and successes. And remember, you don't want to fail Virtue checks because then you start depleting the corruption deck. So that's one thing to get used to, because that is when you're attacking, but when you make a Virtue check, which I will go over here in a moment, the dice, you got to read them slightly different. All right, so let's go to the next section. So now we're on page 10. So another thing you can do is scavenge. This is very important because this is how you find Necronomicon pages. So you pick up all the tokens in your current area, and you get to keep one of them. So really, you got to spend an action every time to pick up something. And so there's no limit to the number of items you can have on your board. But what you'll find out later on is if a player attacks you, whether they're a human player or a Deadite player, because people can get paranoid and players attack other players, even if they're not a Deadite yet, or we'll get to that in a moment. You can take all the objects that someone has. So let's model that right here. So Annie's right here. She'll use her first action. Again, she has 3 actions because it's a 3-player game. She goes through the window as her first action. Her second action is that she looks at the counters herself. She can get these shoes, which she'll look on her board. It can give her +1 movement for a whole turn, or a Necronomicon page. So she's going to take the Necronomicon page. So that is her second action, is scavenging and picking up one of the Necronomicon pages. So she shows it on her player board. And Annie's card, now that she's picked up a Necronomicon page, she can look at the card secretly. She could tell everybody what she got and lie, but she's not allowed to show it, reveal it. So she knows as a player that she's human. I don't know why she would trick it, because this is a semi-cooperative game. She doesn't say anything. Okay. Now, if she was a Deadite, none of the players are Deadites, but let's say she did get as her first card. I just checked. But let's say she got a Deadite. She still wouldn't tell anybody. Okay. And we'll get to this later. She can decide when to reveal herself as a Deadite. So she could secretly be pretending to be human and collecting pages and then run over there and try to help summon the demon, not let anybody know that she's secretly a Deadite. So that's what's kind of cool about the game, is you can try to trick other players if you're into that. That's the semi-cooperative aspect. All right, so she still has one more action left. She can stay here. She doesn't have to use them all. Oops, let me go back to the main board here. She could use the other action to pick up the shoes if she wants, or move into another spot, which she might do so she can get another page later. All right, but anyways, so she moved and her turn is done. Now let's say she had barricades object, which would be right here. She could spend an action placing a barricade, or she could spend an action removing the barricade. She could also, now that if she gets so many pages, she can cast a spell as an action. So let me show you where this is in the rule book here. So you could also trade as many objects as you want with somebody in the same space as you. I already mentioned casting a spell. The other action is remove a barrier or use a token to place a barrier. And it doesn't cost any actions to place tokens. That's important. But it's easy to forget that casting a spell is an action, even though the Necronomicon pages are tokens. So on the next page here, you can also, so we're done with the player actions. Now we get to the Deadite turn. So we draw an event card, spawn any Deadites or bosses, do the event on the card. Players go in order, clockwise order, keeping in mind that on the next turn you'll switch to start player. If someone's a Deadite player, you still go in order from the start player. Okay? So again, just summarizing the things I've gone over. All right, so now the Deadite's turn. So all Deadites move first. Now they recommend that you maybe put them on their side to remember who's moved. So again, I've already mentioned a couple of the rules. Deadite minions can go through windows, but Deadite bosses cannot. Deadite minions and Deadite bosses cannot go through barriers, and that includes Deadite players. So barrier tokens and windows I've already mentioned. Now the Deadites will attack. So here's an important rule to remember. If there are 3 Deadite minions, any Deadite minions above 3 will automatically inflict 1 wound. If there are multiple players in the space, in the area, all players get attacked by the minions. So let's model that. Let's say Ash and Annie are in the same room. There are 2 Deadite minions here. Both Deadite minions will attack Ash and Annie, so you can use the same result. So a success means that they have to get failures to hit. So what happened is Annie and Ash did not get hit at all. If we got a failure, well, let's take a look at the chart. Okay, successes are no effect. But notice a neutral was rolled on that. So you're going to drop 1 Necronomicon page if possible. After this, make 1 virtue check. So because both Annie and Ash were in the same room, both will have to make a virtue check. Now let's take a look what else the chart says. If there was a failure result, you take 1 wound, and you also get the effect of the neutral. You'll drop a Necronomicon page and make a virtue check. So, neutrals, drop a page, make a check. Failures, same thing, but you also take a wound. So how do you do virtue checks? So Annie has a virtue of 3. When it says make a virtue check of 1, she must get at least 1 success, 1 chainsaw with the 3 dice she's going to roll. So she did. It doesn't matter if she gets 2 failures. She has to at least get 1 success. Now Ash, not being very virtuous, yes, will roll 1. He did get a success, but if he did get a blank or a failure and not a success, he would take a corruption card, and since this would be his 2nd corruption card, and if he had not picked up a Necronomicon page, he gets to look at him. And he doesn't need to tell anybody what he is. Okay, now he would have 2 cards if he failed that. Now remember, he doesn't have a page, so he doesn't drop it. But Annie does have a page, and so she would drop it in the space right here. Now again, this is a simulation if there was 2 of them here already. Again, you don't want to get neutral results or failures because then you're dropping pages. And failures, you're taking wounds. All right, so that is attacks. Just to simulate, if there was 3 of them here, okay, you'd roll 3 dice, but if there's a 4th one, you still roll 3 dice, but Annie and Ashley each take a wound, okay, right off the bat. And then you'd roll the 3 dice. And you'd apply the results. She would only take 1 more wound, but then she would have to drop a page and do a virtue check. Again, if she's by herself. If Ash was there, the same effects would apply to him as well. All right, moving on. So at the end of round, that's when you pass the start marker. So now we get to special rules. That's basically how the game works. In the book, there are rules you need to read about the bosses: Henrietta, Killer Tree, the Hand, Rotten Apple. There's I mentioned earlier on, Applehead, I should say, Rotten Applehead. You cannot cast the Gate spell. Now, if you look at the cards here, you'll read them and place them accordingly. Some of them have special effects and how they move. For instance, the Hand can never be killed, and it moves really fast. Rotten Applehead, like I mentioned, it will say here that you place, I guess it says it on the card. Let me find it. I'm trying to remember where it says it. Yes. So on the card, you place 1 arm in the study and 1 arm in the cellar trapdoor. So when that comes up on the 9th turn, Applehead appears here. Hallway and cellar trapdoor, sorry. And 1 arm in the study. Let's just remove all the stuff here. So there's the reason why I'm pointing out these rules here, because you got to pay attention to that. The arms will attack anybody in the house next to a door or window. So we'll move to any room in the house with a door or window facing outside. And then it automatically does 1 damage, which means you're going to drop a page and do a virtue check. And the Applehead also will, if you're in the same space as him, will also do a damage. So let me show that real quick. So let's say Bobby Joe's over here. The arm will move to here because it's a window on the outside and attack her. She automatically takes 1 damage. We'll drop a page and make a virtue check. And you cannot have 2 arms in the same space. So that's another little rule you need to remember. All right, so moving on. So you cannot use the power of the Necronomicon in the same area as a Rotten Applehead. So you need to basically knock him down, do 1 damage to the head in order to cast a spell. Okay, so now we look at the pages of the Necronomicon, and that's where you, when you get to the space here where the portal is, let's say Applehead's not here. Let's say Annie, let me take off all these. I had it set up like this. Okay. Say Annie is over here and has a page already. Goes 1, 2, 3. That's her first action. Second action, she casts the closed portal spell. Portal spell. Doesn't matter how many pages she has. All of them get placed here, but she only had 1. And then her third action, she can do something else. Now, summon Kandarian Demon. This is what the Deadite players do. They go to the same spot and try to seal the portal. And so, if Annie was a Deadite player, she would be placing it on this side of the track. Okay, moving on. And you can cast other spells. Now, one thing you can do that we haven't had a chance to do in our games because we've only been playing a 3-player game as 2 players. So identify a Deadite requires 1 page. You choose another player, and based on the number of pages you have, maximum of 3, you'll roll 3 dice. And total number of successes, that player must reveal that many corruption cards, and they stay face up. So that's, but if you roll 1 failure result, you make a virtue check based on the number of failures. So let's say I'm curious to see if a player is acting in the best interests, and I have 3 pages, I'll roll. I got 1 success, that player will have to reveal 1 card and keep it face up. And then I must make a virtue check based on the number of, number of fair results I rolled. So I'd have to make a virtue 1 check. So if I was Ash, I'd have to get 1 success on 1 die because his virtue is only 1, and he failed, so he would have to take a corruption card. Okay, so moving on. So there's other spells like Bend Time, Command Deadites, Summon Deadite minions. Some of these are for the Deadite player. Okay, so virtue checks I already went over how they work. You can see though when you command a Deadite, there'll be more virtue checks. And notice when you cast Bend Time, you're going to make a virtue check of 3. So if Ash was to Bend Time, he's automatically going to fail 2. Because remember, he only rolls 1 die. So he could end up taking 3 corruption cards if he fails that check. Because remember, he's only rolling 1 die. So say he rolls it, he failed it, and he can't get a virtue check of 3. Annie could, because she has a virtue of 3, she would roll 3 dice. So it's possible for her to pass all 3 if she gets 3 successes. So if Ash were to do this, he's going to take 2 corruption cards and maybe a 3rd. Okay, so now playing as a Deadite, you decide when you can reveal yourself, but you must reveal yourself if you attack another player. Cast Summon Kandarian Demon, that means you go to the portal, which you will, you just go there and do it. You choose to have Deadites ignore you, in other words, you move through the space without having your speed reduced, and then you choose not to be affected by a card that affects human players. So you must flip over the card. You can't trick the other players, you got to flip it over and show that you really are a Deadite. And then over here, it's important to remember you can no longer move freely through areas containing multiple human players. So if there's 2 human players, they're not your allies anymore. You must stop there basically, or when you're moving out, you only have 1 speed. And then over here, you cannot gain any more corruption cards. Anytime you have to make a virtue check, roll a dice equal to the virtue check strength and gained a wound for each failure roll. Okay, and then taking wounds. You won't die in the game. You'll just basically have to drop your objects or get your objects stolen and reappear on a gate, on a spawn space if you're a Deadite player. You'll reappear in one of these, or if you're a player, reappear somewhere in the cabin. So you'll remove your character from the board, put any item tokens you were carrying face down in the area where your mini was. Now if somebody inflicted the last wound, they can take all those objects. And you, again, if a Deadite minion does it, this is why it's mentioning that. You just leave them all there. You must reveal one of your corruption cards if you basically are respawning. So on your next turn, you reappear in the cabin. But if all your wounds are healed, now the Deadite player reappears in a spawn area. Now, the reason why I put a little dot here is because in the FAQ, they also get all their wounds back. But it's important that on the turn that they respawn, they have no actions on the turn you return from the dead. And you can drop as many objects as you want in the space, keeping in mind that to pick up objects, it costs 1 per object. And then I already mentioned that if you defeat somebody, cause the last wound, you can take all their objects. And then a human defeats a human player. They still have to reveal a card. And the winner can look at the entire hand of corruption cards, because somebody might be acting in a strange way and you want to see if they have a Deadite card. So a human can attack a human. that's not a Deadite yet to see their cards. Now, they cannot reveal those cards. Now, they'll reveal one of them, but the player who lost will decide which one they reveal. But the human player can look at them all and lie and say, he's a Deadite. So let's say I'm a human Deadite, but they don't know it yet. I attack another human on purpose to throw the scent off. I win. That human player reveals a card, maybe they have two of them. I look at the other card and I say, oh, you're a Deadite, and I put it down. That human player says, no, I'm not. So that's where the mystery comes into play here. So if I'm a Deadite human that hasn't been revealed yet, I can mess with people and accuse other people of being a Deadite when they're not actually. Okay, so if a Deadite player defeats a human player, I can. So if I am a Deadite and I attack, and this is a 4, 5, or 6 player game, I can give someone. If I have 2 Deadite cards, I only need. Remember, I have to have one revealed. I could have another one in my hand before I became a Deadite, because remember, I can't collect more corruption cards while I'm a Deadite. But while I'm a human, I can collect more corruption cards. I can give that Deadite card to a human that I defeated. You put it, you give it to them face down. They can't say that what they've received. They can look at it, and then they know now that they're working with me as a Deadite player. As to when they reveal it, it's up to that human player who's no longer human, but the other players don't know it. So I haven't had a chance to play this game. Well, actually, we did play it with 3 human players once, but we didn't get into that situation. In a 4, 5, or 6 player game, you can get into more situations where you might be able to pass a Deadite card to someone if you're a Deadite player and you want to give it to them. All right, so the rest of the rules, I've already mentioned that you have this map here, because depending on what kind of light you're in, you might have trouble seeing the areas. You have a page here with more information on the objects, and you have important terms. And then on the very back, you have an index page. Not index, I'm sorry. You have a quick reference. So that is how you play Evil Dead 2, the board game. Now, if there's anything that I misspoke on or I did not include, please tell me in the comments. And please take the time to subscribe and fill out the quick little survey. It's only 3 questions. It will take less than a minute to do. And so I appreciate you watching, and please check out the other videos. Have a good day.